Hi everyone, it's Ruff, your Member of Parliament for Bruce Grey Owen Sound and former Colonel in the Canadian Armed Forces and Afghan veteran myself. I'm actually proud to introduce the stories of Canada's war in Afghanistan. Over 10 people interviewed, from private to colonel, family members, members of the primary reserve to the Reg Force, all here coming to the Billy Bishop Museum to just provide that opportunity to share the great story and challenges of what our Canadian Armed Forces personnel went through in over almost a decade and a half in Afghanistan. So hope you enjoy it. It's a great opportunity to learn more about what our Canadian Armed Forces and our soldiers went through in Afghanistan.
My name is Allan Gordon Johnson, CD. Spent 34 years combined primary reserve, regular force in the Canadian Armed Forces. The CD is actually Canadian Decoration for Time Served. Okay, so in 2003-2004 I was Quebec Company 3RCR anti-armor platoon, and what that means is I took care of the radios, made sure each section could communicate with each other, and we had times when radios would go down or whatever, and I would have to go out and make sure all the radios were good. We had observation posts in the Queen's Palace and the King's Palace. We had patrols to take care of and go out to a dam and have a look out there at containment sites. We had other patrols to take care of in and around the city. Infantry have this I guess, general purpose, everything about them, you know, and we would take up the all-around task of doing things, you know. You'd have to have a 360 awareness of everything that's going on around you, but still be aware, like not close in and have tunnel vision on certain things, you know. Your hearing perks up, your eyesight perks up, you know. And that was that tour. And then of course 06, 07, well, yeah. Medusa was a nightmare. That's the best way to put it. That tour was you know, there are things that took place that, you know, and there are things, you know, like the company commander says, we got to stop sending your platoon out, because every time we send you out, we got to stand up the rest of the company to come get you. That's the type of thing that took place. The day after we crossed the Arghandab River from Panjwai District, our company, Charles Company, became combat ineffective because of an A-10 strafing the company. So, you know, it became a, you know, like we took injuries crossing the Arghandab to start with, and then we took 36 wounded and 1 dead the following day because of an A-10. So like I said, yeah, that tour was a nightmare, you know. And then after that, our platoon was split off with somebody else, and every time we went somewhere, it took, you know, 2 other platoons to come out and, as a QRF, a quick reaction force, to, because every day we went out, we came under contact, you know, and we were fighting our way, and the QRF would come out and, you know, give us a hand. You know, we were escorting everywhere, and we would end up escorting into a shit show. So that was that tour, and then 08, 09, it was, I was at Spurwingar, which was out of Kandahar again, you know, and basically Yeah, it wasn't too bad, you know, but yeah, they were trying to play the same games. Well, loyalty's bought by the highest bidder. Don't trust. Well, it's hard to trust. Yeah. It's hard to, at first glance, winning hearts and minds is very hard when loyalty, you know, it's all tribal. Language, like there's 3 languages spoken, you know, in the country. You know, it's tribe and family. Everything's tribe, everything's family, you know, and each tribe and family speak slightly different versions of Pashto and Dari, you know, and they all are derived from Arabic, you know, so it's very hard, you know, and even some of the interpreters are, you know, not telling you exactly what they're saying. They're only giving you the gist of what they're saying, so it's very hard. So, yeah. All my tours were winter here in Canada. Froze my ass off. Hard reintegrating. And by the time I was done all my tours, so if your stress level, picture your scale of 1 to 10, you're sitting here, your stress level is at like maybe 1, maybe 2, you know, or 0, right? When I came home, I was constantly at 8, 9, right? I couldn't come down from that. So, yeah, I had some problems reintegrating, so, especially after my last one. So, yeah. There's going to be a lot to overcome, because there were troops that went through, like I went through 4 times. I know guys that went through 5 or 6 times. There is going to be a brutal backlash. There's going to be guys sitting there hurting.
My name is Fraser Penny. I'm from Rockville, Ontario. I spent just over 16 years in the Canadian military, and most of my time spent with 3rd Battalion, the Royal Canadian Regiment. I completed 3 tours in Afghanistan in 2003, 2005, and 2010. So the first deployment, I was pretty new, so I was a private in the military and I was in the infantry. Didn't really know what to expect, especially being that new to the Army. It's definitely not what I expected. Some of the sights and smells and stuff like that is still kind of in your head now, I guess. But I would say that was probably believe it or not, being the first rotation in Kabul. That was probably the easiest tour. They had quite a few numbers. I think there was roughly 2,000 soldiers there. So they had a well-established camp for us. They had enough civilians as well. So they had, like even on the base here in Meaford, they have like a Canex where you can go and buy electronics or snacks and any kind of like clothing, towels, anything like that. So they had all that kind of supply over there for us, which was pretty handy because you could only ship so much stuff, and you really didn't know what the living situations were going to be like when you got there. So I was probably one of very few people that actually thought that it was a good idea to mail myself stuff prior. So it was a little like old school because this was 2003, so it was like a little 13-inch cube TV. Bought a brand new, still in the box, and shipped it over to myself. So it was there waiting for me when I got there, and I think it was like a PlayStation 2 at the time or something like that. So at least we had video games to play on our downtime and stuff like that. So I was kind of popular, I guess, that way. But the camp was really well set up, like I said. Good fresh food with cooks. They had a full gym. They basically had like kind of a whole tent system where you could go. They had pool tables and TVs, video games, all that kind of stuff. So during your downtime, it was not quite like being at home, but it was probably the next best thing. So we would, each company, platoon, section would have a certain area of operations which we would patrol. So we would go out either foot patrol or in the Iltis Jeep, which is, well, it's actually been in the War Museum, a retired vehicle for some amount of time now. So we would patrol around our designated area of operations. We'd usually stop in, talk to local police, any kind of Afghan National Army guys that we would see on our route. Just kind of ensure that everything was kosher in their operation that we were working with. We do that during the day, sometimes at night as well. Those Jeeps weren't really the best vehicle at the time, but it was what we had. It's kind of crazy to think now that there was zero armor in them. I mean, especially now thinking that Afghanistan and you're going to take an unarmored vehicle over there is kind of maybe almost signing your own death warrant. There's no speed limits. People drive as fast as they want. There's speed bumps. There's potholes. There's goats. There's anything and everything. And you'd feel bad for some of the locals too, who'd be driving on mopeds and stuff like that with their whole family. So, I mean, you wouldn't want to try and cause an accident, but at the same time, we don't want to get caught up in anything either. So, I think we landed in Dubai. It was kind of a secret camp at the time, and even the people from the country in the UAE didn't really know that we were there. And just the change in temperature was absolutely phenomenal. At first, leaving the aircraft, you thought it was just the heat coming off the engines. But then as you got further and further away from the aircraft, you realized that no, that's the temperature you have to deal with now. We weren't there very long, maybe a night or two, and then we flew actually into Kabul. And there was already Canadian forces there that picked us up at the airport and drove us to the camp. And I just remember being in the armored vehicle, sticking my head out one of the hatches and just trying to really see where I was. And like I said, it was a really urban area that we were in, so a lot of buildings, but you could tell everything was just definitely a third world country. And just looking at the people too, and yeah, but those, I would say the smell of things was one of the things that really stuck with me. Even patrolling through some of the little towns, villages, they don't really have washrooms. They have pipes that stick out the side of their house, and that's where all their waste goes. So we would just flow into the roadway, and that's where we would walk or drive. And there was a few times where our Jeeps got stuck in areas like that. So it was very important to come back and actually ensure you fully clean, sanitize your boots, your footwear, to make sure that any kind of disease that was possibly growing in that sewer system or in those puddles were actually cleaned off and taken care of. The year went on, the temperature changed as well, and these were open Jeeps. There were no doors, there's no windows. So we'd be driving around even at day or night, but especially at nighttime, it was extremely cold. I remember wearing like a fleece underneath and basically like a Four Seasons, basically I'm wearing a snowsuit, pants and jacket, and just trying to avoid not being cold and try and actually pay attention to the job I'm doing. But there would be snow in the mountains. A few times it would actually be snow on the ground there. It wouldn't last very long on the ground, but it would definitely be there throughout the winter months, if you will. My second deployment was back to Kabul in 2005, and once again we deployed, I want to say it was July, August time frame. It was in the summer. This time it was 3 RCR's Recce platoon. We were the only ones to deploy, but we deployed under the RCD. We were a reconnaissance unit. Our background is dismounted though, so usually we would just use vehicles for more transportation. But this whole tour was all mounted. There was nothing dismounted that we did. So we were kind of out of our element a little bit, and like I talked about earlier, we weren't really used to our full capability, which was really unfortunate. We would just be sent off to certain hilltops, and we'd set up our vehicles there and just kind of keep overwatch, look out for anything. But as the time went on, and as we did that, I think complacency was a very, very big thing, and it's happened in every tour that I've been on. As the time goes on, your level of caring kind of goes down, and I noticed it then. We would still have security. We'd have people mounted in the tops of our G-Wagons, but that was about it. But the normal routine was to keep security, and then everyone else would pull out their lawn chairs and start a laptop, and play movies. So there was one time where we went out at night, and I remember being in the security position as we just rotate basically hourly, and the only one that was awake still watching the movie was the interpreter. Yeah, so as you can see there, complacency that I think at that time nothing major was really happening, and you could see that, and people just started to not care. And as you got closer to the end of your tour, you kind of just more thinking about going home and not really the job that you're doing there. But it was kind of a mundane task that we had in the first place, so it was kind of a difficult situation that we were placed in. So I remember in the first tour compared to the second, there was one area that we went to, and it was near a body of water. I couldn't remember what the lake or whatever it was called, but the whole area was mined during the first tour, and the second tour, as we went back, it was actually turned into a golf course, believe it or not. So they had people come in and remove all the mines. There was no grass. It was it was dry, but they actually had a golf course there. I never saw anyone actually playing golf, but yeah, it just kind of showed the level of commitment, even from the UN and NATO, to try and get people in there to remove a lot of those unexploded ordnance that had been there for 20, 40 years. So that kind of showed some improvement. So I deployed to Kandahar for my third tour once again, it was I want to say it's the late spring, early summer, May timeframe of 2010. And we flew into Kandahar. I think we spent one night in Kandahar, and then we were deployed to Masamgar. So that was a fairly well-established camp at the time. We flew in there at night in a Chinook transport helicopter. So these Afghan National Army guys had found a few jugs of these explosives, or what they had thought to be was explosives. So we did our normal SOP of stopping 300 meters back, and we would have our engineers and our dismounted soldiers dismount, and now we're observing the Afghan National Army guys up there. They're right in front of this, what they think is explosives, and they're throwing rocks at it, trying to get it to explode. Thankfully didn't. There are 3 vehicles and everyone dismounted and started moving forward. Once they got up to the site, our engineers verified that it was indeed just empty gas cans or whatever. So then our engineers went back to that kind of 300-meter point where we dismounted and everyone got out, and kind of started searching from there back towards the IED site. And they had found, at that point, it was actually buried, so they found 7 of those jugs. So they're like 20-liter jugs, and there were 7 of them packed with homemade explosives. And it was set off on a pressure plate, so if a vehicle were to drive over that pressure plate, and with that amount of homemade explosives, it would have probably destroyed our vehicle. This mine in the ground was it was 4 inches away from where my tire tracks actually drove by, like I don't know, 20 minutes earlier. So it just goes to show that they watched us. They watched a lot, and they knew exactly what we were going to do. Yeah, so luckily there was no injuries there. It was kind of a long night for us in the vehicle, because now we're potentially in a mined area. Everyone else was in the clear, but they had the engineers basically working all night and kind of clearing a path out for our vehicle. And then I think it was the next day they actually had EOD come out and blow it up. So I think at that point in time in 2010, I'm pretty sure that was the biggest IED that was actually found. Out of the numerous times that we actually got shot at, and whether small arms fire or RPGs, I think there was only like one time that we actually saw someone stand up, turn towards us, and actually shoot an RPG. So a lot of it was, you could see some of the muzzle flash and stuff like that, but I mean, they would take a few shots and take off, or they would shoot the one rocket and then they'd be gone, right? So I was actually on a satellite phone talking to my now wife a few times, and I would usually call early morning over there, because I think it'd be more in the evening here. Whatever the time zone difference was, I can't remember. But I remember I'd be talking on the satellite phone, which was horrible in the first place. It would cut out all the time and stuff like that. I'd be trying to call back all the time, but yeah, it was kind of, I don't know if she found it as funny, but I probably didn't even at the time. But like I was talking about, when some of those civilian aircrafts would come in, they would kind of shoot at the aircraft. They would shoot at our camp. So there I am. I'm like talking with my wife. Sorry, I'll let you go. We're getting shot at. Call her back in 10 minutes. Yeah, everything's fine. Hold on, they're shooting at us again 2 or 3 times, right? And yeah, so it was kind of a lot on her part too. I really didn't deploy to Afghanistan to have any kind of big change. It really wasn't my kind of thing. I was just there to kind of do my job, make sure the guys that I was there with kind of came back. You know, if the Canadian government wanted to send me anywhere else, I was happy to go. But definitely there was a lot of experience and stuff that happened on, you know, their soil, and you know, that kind of stuff's gonna be with me for the rest of my life. Yeah, hopefully over the years they get kind of back into that mentality where, you know, they want to make the change to their own country. And yeah, I mean, I'd be very interested to see even to see how it looks now, to see how all the camps look now that everyone kind of you know, walked away from them and stuff. And yeah.
So my name is retired Sergeant Roger Weron, and I have spent 25 years and 34 days in the Canadian Armed Forces total, and I spent them with the 2RCHA, 2nd Royal Canadian Horse Artillery. And I have completed 5 tours, and 3 of them were Afghanistan tours. And my first tour in Afghanistan was in the 2003 Operation Athena, and that's where I was stationed with 2RCHA F Battery, 1RCR battle group, and then and then that's what it was right now. So on the first tour, when we were down there, right, we were doing actually quite a bit of different types of jobs. An example, right, helping out the local people. And I mean, an example, patrolling out there, right. One of our jobs was to secure a ammo compound, which was called Policharki, right on the outskirts of Kabul. And we were doing a rotations down there where we were going down there for a week, and we were actually doing a security on the entire ammo compound for the entire contingent. Right, that was one of our tasks. Secondary task was a security of Camp Julian, and we were doing a security. Basically, we were doing everything all around. Queen's Palace, there was a big palace down there, right? So in the Queen's Palace, we were overlooking over the entire base and providing security. That's one of our taskings. But primary task was actually protection of all the contingent by providing artillery support to everybody else. And we're using LG-1 Mark II guns, 105 millimeter. It took us about 2 weeks just to get used to the extreme heat. Like I was profusely sweating, so the medics were giving us these little, I don't know, salt tablets. I don't know what exactly they were, to keep all the body moisture inside, right? So about 2 weeks, that's when we started a little bit accumulating into the environment. Also, Kabul is about 3,000 feet above the sea level, so everywhere that you went, you were tired, non-stop. You know? So that's why physical activity and physical fitness came into big effect, right? So if you're out of shape, you're really out of shape over there, right? So and that's basically what we were doing, keeping in shape. You know, I mean, providing a lot of security and providing not air support, but the artillery support for the entire coalition. More or less, everybody carried a gun over there, RPGs on the road, not a problem. Everybody had drugs on them, knives and everything else. That was normal. I mean, so when you're looking at the local population, everyone was pretty much armed, right? And a lot of livestock on the road. Like an example, Kabul, there was not even one working light, like a single light working, and 2 million people, I believe, that lived in that town. And everybody's on the road. So first tour I did in 2003, second 2006, and then the third tour 2008. Right. So 2006 we arrived now in different location. That was Kandahar. We landed down there, and again you open up the door into the same stink, and right away you're like, all right, I know where I am at. Right. This is all real. Right. And when we were landing in the, this is actually a little bit of story, right? So we are coming in from Dubai. We're flying in, low-level flying. This is like being on the roller coaster. You're flying so you don't get shut down, right? And it's really scary because they shut all the windows down and they turn the lights on. That means business is on, game face on, little lights. You're wearing full equipment. Everything is ready to go, right? There's a possibility you're going to get shut down, and they tell you this right away. So you're coming in. And just before you start landing the aircraft, the pilot is doing the roller coaster thing, and then they start popping the countermeasures. So you don't know if you're getting hit or not, because the pilot is trying to land the aircraft when the countermeasures are going out. Everybody knows what the countermeasures are, right? It's these little bombs that come out of the aircraft. So when the rocket goes in, you don't get shut down. And then quickly we land, they open up the ramp and everybody just jump out because you are in the war zone. You might get hit or you might get injured right away. So that was my first introduction, right? And my second tour, this is where I worked in that Tactical Operations Center, right in the middle, and I was part of FSCC, Fire Support Coordination Center. This is where we were looking at the big picture now. I knew where everybody else was on the map. This is like in the movies. You have the captain in the middle, artillery on the side, engineers on the other side. The tank guys are up here, and support and medics. Everybody's in the same room, but all the important people that you need. So if anything happens, like a tick, right? When the tick happens, you know right away. So an example where we had the IED strike. Tick happens, we declare a tick, so that means emergency, they're priority one, right? So this is where my job was to spool up the, let's say the aircraft, right? An example, Blackhawks, and send them into that location so we can extract all the injured soldiers, right? And again, provide security, right? So we're actually quite busy in the Tactical Operations Center because everyone is important down there. Right? And then you have to prioritize. I understand everyone is important, but you're important, but then you have to prioritize, just like a triage, you have to prioritize, right? So when the tick is declared, everything is on hold, you're just trying to help these guys on the ground right now. In the Tactical Operations Center, we have these big TVs, and we were actually working with the Americans, right? And they were providing us with a drone footage where we could actually look at the TV and like, okay, that's a bad guy, that's our guy, right? And you can distinguish between good and bad. It's a little infrared beacon, right? And you can set the code in there, like let's say it blinks 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, and we know that could be one platoon, right? So when you're looking through the drone, through the infrared, you can see all these blinking lights, and like, that's our guys. Don't hit them over there. No blinking over here, you know what I mean? Let's make this place a little bit quiet up here, right? So that's what we were doing, right? And we were directly supporting the infantry. Infantry were the guys that everybody supported. The boots on the ground, we were it. Right? Everybody supported the infantry. So the medics, tanks, artillery, oversight with the drones and all the aircraft that we had on station. Right? So, and we were busy. We were running 3 shifts, 24/7 nonstop, and each shift was firing between I want to say 250 rounds in each shift, right? And then they had to cut us out. So they told us, okay, we can't fire that many rounds, right, in 24-hour period because we're going to run out within a week or two, right? So they give us a cap of 250 rounds in 24 hours. Everybody was on standby, right? And we were losing, again, a minimum, entire coalition, we were losing 1 guy a day. That's how it was, right? So the helicopters were always coming in and out and doing their work. And we got very good at it. So if somebody got hit, we could get them out within 20 minutes, right? 20 minutes, so you get hit, and within 20 minutes, we can get you out of that entire area. Most of the soldiers, before we go on a tour, we are very well trained, right? In advanced first aid, I would say. This is where you guys are normally taught, right? It's basic first aid, a couple compressions, this and that. We're taught different things. An example, you know what I mean? Bullet wounds, you know, sucking chest wound, all kinds of other stuff. And then you learn tricks of the trade, how to stop all kinds of different stuff. An example, bullet holes were really quickly stopped with, believe it or not, with a tampon. I used to carry about 10 of those because they really stop the blood, you know what I mean? You pull it out, you squeeze it in there, yes, buddy is, you know what I mean, yelling. But you got to save his life, you know what I mean? You don't care about that. And we received extremely good training before we went over there. And especially when that was my second tour, I knew exactly what to expect, and we were trained extremely well, especially infantry, artillery, armored, and the medics, extremely well trained. On the third tour, this is Task Force 308, right? I basically told the artillery guys, you know what, I think I'm done. You know what I mean? I already spent a lot of time in there. Give me a job where I can just kind of still help out, but I don't want to be on the front line anymore. I mean, I already done this. I want to do something else, right? So they basically told me that I can go and be part of BQMS, Battery Quartermaster. This is where I give equipment. I provide beans and bullets. Basically, that's what I can say. Right? But again, it was very hectic. So most of the F battery, that was the F battery, they were all out. We only had about 12 or 15 guys in Kandahar, and this is where we were doing all of our business. So 7 guys were with the Tactical Operations Center, and the other 7 guys were with the BQMS. This is where we got the mail for the guys, right? Food, whatever they desired, we were sending it to the different tasks. So we were more or less like a postal office for our own guys, right? So let's say they call us up and they said, well, we need food, we need this, we need that. We quickly get it for them and we give it to them. So it was still very hectic, but a very important job, right? You cannot operate outside the wire without any support. You need support. You need the cooks, you need the vehicle mechanics, you need the guys that give you ammunition, food, letters, you know what I mean, and all kinds of stuff, comms. You need all this stuff, right? Everybody that was down there, everybody's job was extremely important. Right from the guy that was giving you food to the guy that was squeezing the trigger. I mean, everybody's job was extremely important. Most of the guys, when they come back, right, they have some type of a stress injury. If they say they don't have it, they're liars. I'm telling you right now. You know what I mean? Because everybody comes back and you're changed men. Because what you see over there, you don't see it here on daily basis. So my suggestion is every guy that comes back and they need help, VA has a lot of good, extremely good programs where they can actually help you out. If you don't want to go and see the VA, we have Wounded Warrior, we have Soldier On, we have all these other programs where guys can actually go down there and get help. But the first step that you have to take, you have to identify yourself as, I need help. Or somebody else will have to guide you and say, hey buds, you need help, you know what I mean, you're sad, you're this and that, go and get some help, right? So that's my thoughts, and then that's why we also have a motorcycle group right here in Owen Sound, Meaford, Canadian Veteran Freedom Riders, and we have 19 guys, and most of these guys, right, they've seen a lot of combat, and everyone is suffering from something. Either Rwanda or Cyprus or Bosnia, Afghanistan, all kinds of, but we can all relate and we can help each other out if the doctor can help you out, right? And again, there's a lot of different help where guys can go and get it, VA or Soldier On, all these other places, right? But step 1 is you have to ask for help, you know what I mean? I'm not a magician, you know what I mean? I'm not a healer, you know what I mean? You have to identify yourself, I need help, and then help is here for you.
Hey, g'day, I'm Steve Lehman. I was a Master Warrant Officer with the Royal Canadian Dragoons. We were attached to the 1st Battalion Royal Canadian Regiment in Petawawa, and we deployed on Roto 6 to Afghanistan, to Roto 6, 05 to 06. There's a couple, naturally. We got there, of course we had basically left when the Princess Patricia Canadian Light Infantry under Colonel Hope were overseas, and as we're departing to leave, we're reading the newspapers, and our families are reading the newspapers about how many guys have been killed recently, and we're saying, well, that won't happen to us, we'll be okay. We deployed in, would have been August of 05 or so. By the time we had the handover, we were pretty well in theater for about a month before we launched Operation Medusa, which was the push across the Arghandab River to chase the Taliban out of their defense positions. Panjwai was the city. They were defending, basically it's the gateway to Kandahar. You control the city of Panjwai, you control the gateway to Kandahar, and you control the city itself. So the Taliban had dug in there after the Patricias had left, and they intended to stay. Initially, during the start of Medusa, our squadron was to be the 4th maneuver element as the other companies from the battalion were pushing across the river. A British reconnaissance aircraft crashed with about 11 members on board, all of them killed. So our squadron went to, for the most part, our squadron went to deploy and protect the crash site. By the time the first phase of our job had ended, we had not been deployed in the initial battle. We did have some family that had taken casualties, so we moved to Patrol Base Wilson to let the Padre brief their members. We were in Wilson for a couple of weeks, and eventually we started to establish observation posts across the Arghandab River and built a route, I believe it was Summit, so we could allow the farmers to come back and start tending their crops. We had great support from the Americans, great support from the artillery. For the longest time we were camped dug in on Spearman Gar, which was a anthill in the middle of Taliban country. You know, there was some reports through monitoring their communications that they were going to have 250 fighters trying to overrun our position one night, so we were on stand to, which is pretty well 50% manning, waiting for them to try and rush the camp. And you know, we would have reenacted the Green Berets film. Things would have been better for us. And you know, our guys did a phenomenal job over there. We brought peace to our country for 20 some odd years, and you know, as we could say, we were winning the war when we left. But eventually, we were there for 20 years. We trained a professional military force, and you know, it's somewhat disheartening to know that they pretty well we carried the fight for their country more than they did. So you know, it's now when we pulled out and when NATO pulled out, it's reverted back to the Taliban. So disappointed. What's more disappointing is knowing that people, you know, were saying that it was for nothing. And I said, no, we gave them, you know, a peace and an opportunity to. This is what you could have for 20 years. You know, women were educated, children were educated. There was some freedom again, but unfortunately, you know, it wasn't necessarily what their people wanted. You know, for the most part, they wanted the security, and they really didn't care so much as who provided that security. You know, you never let your guard down completely, but you still don't. You know, everything's guarded. Every noise is brings something back, and you have that 0 to 60 reaction that you know, fight or flight. I'm ready to go, and it pretty well spools up quite quickly. So it's one of the I don't want to say electrical malfunctions of your brain, but it's something that you're trained to do. You know, you do what you can with the time you have, and then you go overseas, and you know, stuff will happen, and the cards will be played. You can always think that you know, you'll second guess yourself for the rest of your life. That did we do the right thing at this time? And you know, you'll play with that for the rest of your life. You'll think that, you know, if we had have done this, maybe this guy wouldn't have happened. But unfortunately, you know, wartime, you can't mitigate all of the dangers. You know, sometimes they're going to lose good men to just bad luck, and you know, they were a highly professional military. And so we were going to fight terrorists. No, we were fighting a professional military of guys with anyone with an axe to grind against the West, Chechens, Pakistans, Afghans, and these guys that had been to war for some time. So they were professionals. They were dug into trenches and bunkers, and they knew exactly what they were doing. So it wasn't, you know, we were not engaging just a bunch of guys with an AK and a chip on their shoulder. So it was, you know, it was a professional military we were facing, and a regular military, I'd say, but still very professional in their training. So you want to look back, and you know, it's you could say it's the first war Canada's lost. You know, that's something we've never done before. But you know, again, we ceased combat operations, I believe, in 2011, and the training mission in 2014. So, you know, we were winning when we left, but it was, you know, we, the West, wanted to bring their country around more than they did, I guess. So, you know, a lot of people think it's for naught, you know, the sons and daughters we'd lost for Canada. But if you speak to any of the veterans or families that have fallen, you know, it can't be for nothing. It was, you know, we gave them 2 decades of peace and nation building, which can never be taken away.
I'm Carol Mitchell.
I'm Bob.
My husband, and our son went to Afghanistan and was killed in Afghanistan. So it's been almost 14 years now, but of course, it doesn't matter how long it is. 3 months later, my youngest son died of cancer. So, so that was a particularly bad year for us. Before he left, we talked, and he said that he wasn't sure he was going to come back. And I said to him, well, then don't go, because if you don't come back, I don't want you to go. And he said, Mom, I have to go. I believe in it, and I have freedom, and I want the people in Afghanistan to have freedom. I want children to be able to go to school, and I want women to have a say in what they do. So, so he was aware that people were going to die and had died, but he just felt he had to go. And talking to other veterans who went to Afghanistan, a lot of them would say, I'm not coming back, and then the next tour they'd be back, because they knew that if they didn't, it would be overrun again. And of course, I guess that's what's happened. When he was there, they had Operation Medusa. That was their big operation at that time. And so he survived Operation Medusa, but he was right near where the young man who was killed by the American pilots, you know, by mistake, he was just down from them. So he saw it all, and he told us, you know, it was really scary. You know, he survived that battle. But then they hit 4 places at the same time in retaliation, and that was when he was killed. So, he wasn't there a long time, but he was doing what he believed in. I think it is. I mean, I think any time is a good time, because what it says is, Carol, your son's not forgotten. We're going to remember. We remember the war that he went to. We remember that people got killed, and we want others down the road, people you'll never meet, to remember. I think we all want to be remembered. I think that we need to remember our vets, whatever kind of vets. I personally think that the Afghanistan people should be remembered. I really feel that the people in Owen Sound care have been good to us. Yes, there are people who are against the war and say silly things, but you know, also I remember saying to this colonel, you know, I get so mad when people say to me, you know, to the government, or why are they at war? You know, they shouldn't be in a country they shouldn't be in, and all this. I said, how do you stand it? Because they call you names, and they say things. And he said, well, you know, I think we have to go back to the beginning, which is freedom. In Canada, we have freedom, and we're fighting in other places for freedom. And if we really believe in freedom, then we know that they have the freedom to express their opinions. We may not agree, but they have the freedom to do it. My son died fighting for freedom, and that involved the Afghan people. And you ask any woman who's in government right now if it matters to her that the Canadians and the soldiers were there, or children female children who weren't allowed to go to school. You ask them now that they're in university or have a job, ask them. Because I went to something at the War Museum, and there was a woman there who spoke, who was in the government in Afghanistan. And she came up to me and she hugged me and she said, thank you for allowing your son to come to Afghanistan and gave me the chance to be the best person I could be in government and change things. And when we were there, we saw some little kids going to school, and we had our Canadian flag on different things, and she must have seen it. Anyway, she looked at me and she waved, and I waved at her, and she said, she had a school bag on. She pointed to her school bag and she did this. Well, does that sound like they died for nothing? Not to me. They died for freedom. And no, I don't like what happened, but I can't change that.
I'm Alex Ruff. I'm the Member of Parliament for Bruce Grey, Owen Sound, but more importantly, I'm doing this interview and this opportunity here with the Billy Bishop Museum to talk about my military career. Over 25 and a half years in the Canadian Armed Forces as an infantry officer with the Royal Canadian Regiment. 5 overseas deployments, 2 in Bosnia, 2 in Afghanistan, and 1 in Iraq. But I'm going to specifically talk about my time in Afghanistan. So my first deployment to Afghanistan was in 2007, late January, early February, as the company commander of Hotel Company, 2nd Battalion, the Royal Canadian Regiment, where I had the privilege of commanding a square combat team for the majority of that 6-month deployment. I'll get into a bit more details later. And as well, my second deployment, when I was actually the commanding officer of the 2nd Battalion, the Royal Canadian Regiment, in 2012, when we deployed back as the Canadian contribution to the training mission Afghanistan under the NATO training mission Afghanistan up in Kabul, which was an 8-month deployment where I took half my battalion back along with a number of other senior officers across the Canadian Armed Forces, where we're really focused on capacity building. But again, we'll get into those details as I talk about 2012. But those are my 2 deployments in Afghanistan. So the first time I got over there was actually in 2006, just right after Operation Medusa, which at that time was the biggest NATO offensive military operation in the history, really since Korea for Canada, and under Canadian leadership as well, with General Fraser as the division commander and Lieutenant Colonel Omer Lavoie, who was commanding the 1st Battalion of the RCR at the time. So what we went over with is the tactical reconnaissance, or TAC Recce as we call it. We deployed in September of 2006. We got in there okay, and then we've got a number of briefings. I got to link up with then Major Mike Wright and his company commander, Sergeant Major Hoye, if I'm pronouncing his name correctly, out at Patrol Base Wilson after a couple days. And Major Wright now is still serving. He's actually a Major General, commanding our intelligence command, basically, the Canadian Forces Intelligence Command. He's still serving, but phenomenal officers. But I'll never forget, Mike gave me was up giving me a brief at the top of the command post at Patrol Base Wilson when a watch officer, one of the sergeants or warrant officers, came up to pass on the terrible news that he had just lost 4 of his soldiers to a bicycle IED. And so they obviously took off, him and his sergeant major, quite quickly, left myself back at the patrol base to go link up at the scene, which was only a few kilometers away. And then, within a few hours, obviously I'm seeing those 4 fallen heroes, their remains coming into the camp. And then a few hours after that, I'm actually back out with Mike and his combat team on the ground, being briefed. And the leadership, the resolution that existed within his soldiers was nothing short of awe-inspiring to see there, and just how strong but how resolute they were to continue the mission and to pay respect, but to carry on with what they needed to do, because at that time they're only a few months, they're only about halfway through their deployment, if that. And so learned a lot just from that experience. Was out with them for the next 24, 48 hours before we drove back into Kandahar Airfield. And then myself and the rest of the tactical reconnaissance, we did that ramp ceremony at Kandahar Airfield. We did it again at Camp Mirage. We did it again with that because we rode with the remains right back to Trenton, and did the ramp ceremony again there before we got back to for the plane actually flew us back to Gagetown, New Brunswick, which is where we were based out of at the time. So needless to say, for the remaining few months in the next opportunity I got to brief my soldiers as we continued our training, I knew exactly what we were getting ourselves into, and that unfortunately there was a good probability that not everybody was going to come home. So it was eye-opening, and at the same time almost you couldn't really ask for better preparation, I guess, before we eventually deployed. February 10th, but the date might be wrong, I might be off by a little bit. We got into our first sort of ambush right near where Mullah Omar, who is sort of the father of the Taliban, his home location in the Hausi Madad area of Panjwai or Zari district. And I remember we got opened up on about 3 different spots, so it was a little bit chaotic. We did have local Afghan police with us, and it's too bad I didn't have my LAV captain, then Captain Dave Nixon, here to tell his story, because it basically opened up the whole ambush with what we call a negligence discharge with a RPG by the Taliban. They were sneaking up and trying to engage Dave's light armored vehicle, when, as they were climbing over the wall, they basically shot it straight up in the air. So it gave Dave and his gunner time to react, and needless to say, it didn't pan out too well for the Taliban. But that went on for a few hours, and that was sort of our first experience commanding troops in combat. Unfortunately, on April 8th, 2007, as we were doing really our last convoy escort, I'd set call sign 22, one of my platoons, out to, after we had already deployed forward. I was, myself and one of my other platoons, and with some tanks as convoy escort, because if you understand the terrain, we have a map right here, but when you get up to the Sangan Valley, there's a mountain range that runs in between, and so I told the platoon commander, Ben Rogerson, to set up basically in between, to act as a radio rebroadcasting capability, RB, and they deployed out afterwards. And just as we were finishing up the escort, unfortunately they hit an IED as they were maneuvering through a Kerez system, and the Kerez system is the series of irrigation holes or wells that they dig to find the water as they're going across the desert. And sometimes those holes will be 50, 100 feet, 200 feet apart. Sometimes they get quite narrow. Unfortunately, they were quite narrow in the location when they hit the system, and they went through the first widest spot that they found. And unfortunately, the Taliban had put down a very large pressure point improvised explosive device, and it took out the lead vehicle and killed 6 of my soldiers that day. Sergeant Dunn, all the ones that were, 6 of them were in the back, the air sentry in the back. Sean Fevens actually survived. He's still serving in the Canadian Armed Forces, although he's in the Air Force now. Decided enough with the ground army stuff. After that, the gunner, the crew commander, and the driver all survived as well. So 6 out of the 10, though, did perish that were in the back below. And Sergeant Donnie Lucas, Corporal Aaron Williams, Corporal Brent Poland, Corporal Christopher Stanix, Private David Greenslade, and Private Kevin Kennedy. And I just remember that day as the worst day of my life. When it first came over, it comes over the radio as, it was a bit broken, because again, that's the issue. We were at the length of our sort of communications, and it came over as, IED hit or something like that, 2 VSA, more casualties. VSA, vital signs absent. And then again, you're trying to clarify that, ask for them to say again. And by the time it sort of clarity got through, it was up to 6. And I was about 20 some kilometers away with my TAC at the time. I passed direction on to the platoon commander to get everybody else back once the convoy was fully handed off, and told my driver and the rest of my TAC, so in my tactical sort of setup, I had 3 other armored vehicles with me, and it's follow me kind of deal, and told the driver to put the pedal to the floor. And I don't think it took us very long to cross that 20 kilometers through the desert and get to the site where the incident had occurred. And you know, fortunately, we got the survivors to back to Kandahar Airfield. Medevac airlift came in to get them out, and then we dealt with the cleanup. And it took us about 24 hours to get the site cleaned up. In the end, once it was all said and done, we brought out capabilities to investigate the site. That's an important thing that we did at the time in Afghanistan, to try to determine what went right, or how was it caused, etc. So we had experts that would come out. They came out, we did that, and then when it was all said and done, we cleaned up the site with having a combat team with armored engineer vehicles, etc. We were able to basically leave the place in pristine condition, but it was a massive IED that the one tire alone off the vehicle was about 300 meters away from where the vehicle had been hit. It was about 50 feet from where the vehicle was hit to where it stopped. The tail ramp, which I don't know how many, weighs a couple tons I think by itself, was blowing off of it, etc. But we cleaned everything up, we recovered the vehicle, and I walked the site afterwards, and I still, to this day, I still wear my dog tags, and this washer is the only thing I found on the ground, and I wear it every day just so I'll never forget those 6 guys. And to me, that's just an important way to pay tribute and to never forget them. And so that was sort of the worst day of my life, and was tough on everybody, and it took us a while, but it was at the tail end of this really 35-day operation non-stop out in the desert. After that, when we went back to Kandahar Airfield and did the ramp ceremony, etc., we did have about a week or so, a week and a half, before my troops or we were back outside the wire, as we called it. But it was important to get everybody back, including the survivors, other than Sean Fevens, who was obviously medevaced back to Canada. But those guys needed to come back, although, to be frank, there's still lots of my soldiers from that deployment, from that platoon, and you know, and especially that section 22 Bravo, as they were called, still dealing with a lot of mental health issues and personal challenges. I think in particular the engineer section that I'd asked to clear the vehicle before the remains were removed, because I was concerned at the time of possible unexploded ordnance. I don't know if any of those guys are 100% well to this day, because seeing something like that is so traumatic. As you have those ups, obviously the downs, you know, losing anybody sucks in the best of times, but when you're in command, it's even tougher. And the only thing that was tougher for me since that day was actually meeting the majority of the families and close friends of the 6 fallen heroes a couple months after we came back to Canada, and we were doing a medals parade and getting that opportunity to meet them, because there's nothing you can say to a family member, a loved one of somebody who's lost somebody in war, to reassure them or really say anything. That's the only thing that's tougher, because even to this day, I'm still lost for words on what do you say, how do you reassure them. Just know that you'll never forget them, and they, they died heroes. I'm not a big believer in the past, in reliving any mistakes. Right? We are where we are. We don't. I've been trying to build a time machine in my garage for years. I'm not there yet, so it's really hard to change the past, and you can beat yourself up forever. And again, it goes back to losing my 6 guys. You want to talk about second guessing, and how do you live with that? And you want to, every day, and still to this day to some extent, but especially immediately following it, for every almost waking minute is, did I fail to train them properly? Was there something in the direction I gave? Could I have done anything different? So that's sort of my only regret. I don't regret Canada having contributed and gone there. I don't regret that it's failed. I'm a big believer, and I've said this in the House of Commons and in the public record, that regardless of what the situation in Afghanistan is now, they spent a decade where girls could go to school and had an opportunity. And I am still optimistic that maybe one of those young girls that got an education and were trained why we were there, why Canada was on the ground, why NATO was involved in Afghanistan, will be back as the future president of Afghanistan. Maybe not next year, maybe not the year after, it might take a decade or two. So I don't regret that, despite us having lost 158 Canadian soldiers over there. I don't think any Canadian Armed Forces member that's over there and was over there really, they may all have their own individual regrets to some extent, but ultimately when we went there at the time, you go over there believing you can make a difference and make the world a better place, and you believe in serving Canada, and that's why you can't fault anybody that's willing to put on the uniform and ultimately knowing that they can make the supreme sacrifice.
Oh, I'm Cameron Bruce. I born and raised in Port Elgin, Ontario. I went to Afghanistan in 2008, 2009. I am a reservist with the Grey and Simcoe Foresters out of Owen Sound, Ontario. I initially went as a force protection platoon. We had 2 tasks to do convoy escort for resupply convoys to the forward operating bases, and we were also rotated through guarding one of the main entry points into the Kandahar airfield called, I believe it was ECP-2 or 3. The Slovak army took over that task, and there was 2 platoons rotating between those tasks, and so our platoon was mainly infantry, so they were able to re-roll our platoon, split it up, and I got assigned with my section to the construction management organization, and so we provided security for a construction project of a irrigation canal, kind of a ditch. So when they built Route Summit between Fob Massamgar and Fob Wilson, they quickly built a road to put some presence in that area, and by virtue of doing that, they interrupted the irrigation canals the farmers had used. So the aim of the project was to correct the errors the construction of the road had created, and so they hired approximately 100 locals to do a lot of it by hand as a way to employ the local population, and they also had some heavy equipment. We're in Fob Wilson is in Zari province in what we call Pajmal villages, and so prior to my tour, that was kind of the epicenter of a lot of the conflict. And so by the time I was there, now after I left, I don't know exactly what happened, but when I was there, we didn't have any contacts and we were on the road every day. Partly maybe because we were employing the local population, we were able to do that. But one kind of interesting situation I would say I've told before is I was guarding an intersection to an offshoot of a fairly dirt road, and there was a gated compound, and there's some kids outside the gate that were just hanging about, and usually we assess kids as a low threat, and so they were allowed to kind of mingle closer to us. But older fellow, I'm going to guess 16 years old, but you really couldn't tell you for sure, came out and he started getting close, and I was like, oh, back up, like and he kind of gave me a little bit of a like teenage attitude. But then he opened his mouth, then he spoke to me in perfect English, and I was kind of stunned because one of the little kids, 3 or 4 years old, was saying something I didn't understand because they were speaking in Pashtun, and he said, oh, they're saying this, and I was kind of stunned because this place that's supposed to be kind of this very rural location in Afghanistan, he had the opportunity somewhere to learn English, and especially for a location where there are a lot of challenges for children getting education. It was just kind of a inspiring moment to know that at least, so sometimes I wonder what happened to that fellow. In my platoon, we were all reservists initially, and so we came from all over Ontario as reservists as that platoon. We were the force protection platoon for the national support element, and then we did have some augmentation from regular force that as some soldiers were, life circumstance or whatnot, they weren't able to go on tour. We got replacements from regular force before we went to Afghanistan, and even in Afghanistan we got some replacements. And I guess it was weird because there's so much attention to being someone who went to Afghanistan, and it was something that I didn't want to be like my sole identity. Hi, I'm Cameron, I went to Afghanistan. So I always and people, it's always strange to have people, thank you for your service, and that it's just kind of like, I didn't necessarily do it to get thanked for doing it. I kind of did it for a multitude of reasons, but I kind of always had the idea in my mind when I joined the reserves at 16 years old that I kind of wanted to do that, and I had certain ideas about what I was doing, and maybe those have changed since then, now that I'm not 19 years old, but what you can accomplish in the world and how you can accomplish it. So yeah, and certainly I think it does affect other people's identity as well, because then your mother becomes the mother with a son in Afghanistan, or your sister becomes the sister with a brother in Afghanistan. So not only when I returned home, I felt this didn't really want to have everyone acknowledging what I had done. I didn't want to showboat it, but at the same time, they're also forced into being somewhat of, especially in a small community like Port Elgin, everyone kind of knows you, and then they know your son's in Afghanistan. So it's kind of an interesting situation in that regard. Something that's certainly interesting concept is, as you go on, faces you saw, whether in Afghanistan or people you worked with, or people you've worked with maybe on that pre-training, and seeing them pop up on the news, a story about them struggling with OSI, or unfortunately people that have made a decision to take their own lives, and that's not just been one, but there's been multitudes, and not really having connections with them. There's one fellow I saw once in a mess a couple years prior, and then somebody sent a message on Facebook, and there was a news story about someone, but I didn't know who it was, and then all of a sudden that was that person that had unfortunately made that decision. And so it's kind of interesting, the legacy, especially at 19, you don't really think about a legacy or whatnot, and then seeing your peers and people you've interacted with and what they've struggled with as the years have gone on.
Hello, my name is Major Travis Kelley, but I go by TJ, and I went to high school in Meaford, not too far from here, Georgian Bay Secondary School at the time. I joined the Canadian Forces in 2004 as a reservist while I was finishing my undergraduate degree in engineering, and then really enjoyed the work that I did there. Found that for me it was a much better fit than some of the private sector work I'd done as a cooperative education student. And so after I graduated, I applied and was accepted into the regular force, finished basic training, and in 2008, as part of 2 Canadian Mechanized Brigade, I deployed to Afghanistan in the brigade headquarters as part of the 2nd Combat Engineer Regiment, which was providing engineer support to the brigade. While I was in Afghanistan, my primary job was to work as the engineer intelligence officer. This was not a new idea, but the implementation in Afghanistan was sort of new. We'd tried in a couple of ways before, but this is the first time that a lot of resources had been put towards it. And my responsibility in that capacity was to, in many ways, coordinate between intelligence and engineering. There are two bits of the military that don't sort of traditionally talk a lot, but there's a lot that goes back and forth. In particular, in Afghanistan, it was more important than usual because of the emphasis on counter-IED. IED, an improvised explosive device, often referred to as a roadside bomb in the news, is an engineering problem because it's explosives, and that's what my trade, combat engineer, deals with. But it's an intelligence problem because it's the enemy's tool, and we're trying to find out where they are and keep track of them, the things that our intelligence people were really focused on. And so in that capacity of engineer intelligence, I was helping to coordinate between those two branches, but it turned out that there was a lot more to talk about than just counter-IED in that role once we started to explore it. One of the most interesting things I did was I did a lot of work making maps in Afghanistan, trying to coordinate the ground truth, because the battlefield that you're fighting on is a critical consideration that affects friendly, enemy, and civilian activity in any battle space, including the one in Afghanistan. And so I got to work a lot with geomatics and cartographers to try and communicate the engineer information about things like roads into a digital picture that everyone could see and understand, which we called the common operating picture. It's very important for everyone to fight from the same map. A lot the same way that an orchestra needs to all have the same sheet music, or it's not going to sound right. The army needs to have the same maps, or they're not going to be well coordinated. And there were some challenges there, because there were a lot of different organizations doing their own maps in different ways, both in terms of different nations, different scales, from the division to the brigade to the battle group, and also some special organizations. The Afghans were working there, a lot of non-military actors were in the area, and special forces also work in a sort of slightly isolated fashion in order to preserve their secrecy. And so all of these different bits wound up with slight divergences. I had a lot of fun doing work with specialists and generalists alike, trying to consolidate our maps and make sure that we could continue to be playing the same song, fighting off the same map. However, one of the most unique experiences I had was a short time, about 6 weeks in the middle of my deployment there, when one of the other engineers in theater, for reasons I'm not precisely aware of, had to leave his post for that short period of time. And his position was considered very important. There was a relatively small number of people doing his work. And so I had the opportunity to go out to the front lines and take his place for those 6 weeks. And what he was doing was running what was called a construction management team. It was a new idea, an exploratory concept for the exact circumstances we faced in Afghanistan. And their job was to take a small team of military to protect and teach a group of Afghans in construction techniques. Now, most people are aware that we spent a lot of time training the Afghan army and their police, but we also did some training for civilians, and this was one of the few places that we did so. And so I was teaching a gang of about 500 Afghans how to build a road. Things like surveying, leveling, setting out, drainage, these sorts of things. Really applying some of the things I learned as an engineer and working with specialist technicians from my team. And so we were guarding their work site, but also teaching them and securing them. And that road was going to connect the area of Masumgar, which is in the corner of the Panjwai district, and right beside Bazar-e-Panjwai, the main Panjwai market town, into the agricultural region south of the Arghandab River, which was an important place for growing a lot of economically viable crops. And by providing them a road into that market, we could facilitate exchange, and through that market ultimately to Kandahar, the provincial capital. And that exchange, the intention at least, was to facilitate the option for those farmers to grow something that was commercially viable that wasn't opium. The project was also interesting for a couple of reasons. By building a permanent paved road there, we provide better security for Canadian forces who are in the area. A paved road is much more difficult to plant an IED, a roadside bomb, in, and so that would give us a better ability to move up and down that region, which had historically been a Taliban stronghold. Furthermore, by employing these people, we gave them another option for feeding their families. It's a difficult place to live and a difficult time to be living there. And a lot of the local people didn't wish to be involved in the fighting. They had no strong moral allegiance to the Taliban, but the Taliban were willing to pay them to take a quick shot at the coalition forces as they were passing. Well, now they could turn that down. No, thank you, we're doing okay, because we were paying them for this work at a rate that would enable them to to feed their families, to take care of their dependents, and not be forced into the position of fighting for money. And as an added advantage, we also found that giving them good, honest, hard work to do, as well as their duties as farmers and other local people, often left them with not enough time to consider taking a shot, even if they had an ideological tie to the Taliban. We were just tiring them out. All of these things helped to improve security for the Canadian forces, but were, in my mind, also a long-term investment in Afghanistan. You could see the effectiveness that security was making in this region when Canadian forces arrived in the region of Bazar-e-Panjwai fairly early on in our campaign in Kandahar province. It was a ghost town. About 500 people lived there. But by the time I was there working on this road, the town had grown to about 25,000. There was a market that was working and flourishing there. You could buy bicycle parts and things like that the local people wanted to have. And so all this exchange was being facilitated through the roads that were being secured by coalition forces, and the Canadian forces in particular, with Kandahar in that region as the main sort of commercial hub in that part of Afghanistan. I think that the program was effective because I remember being told that the Taliban had started their own project at the other end of the same road. So we're actually two different construction groups building our way towards the center, putting in a road to support these farmers, because the farmers asked, well, you say that they're against us, why aren't you helping us the way they are? And to me, that's really validating of the concept for that operation. And in the end, I remember when I was there, the main highway in Afghanistan, Highway 1, was built by the British forces in the 1800s. It was paved by the United States in the 1960s, and that road's still there. It's a critical economic link. It's a symbol of good times in that country. And I hope that the road that I helped to build is going to last a century as well. There's a lot of things that were an effort to buy time in Afghanistan, but that's a permanent legacy. I think that's one of my favorite memories, and something that's maybe not unique, but special about being an engineer. I don't wish to reduce the value of what the other soldiers in theater did, but one of the great things about being an engineer is leaving something behind as well. And so that road is still there and is likely going to be there when I'm gone, when everyone who was there is gone, just like the road the British built is still there and still serving its purpose for the people of that country. And so getting accustomed to working in the desert and then just doing the job with the people I would work with. All of this was part of our road to getting ready. And a lot of that training was practical. Make sure you can shoot, because you never know. Make sure you understand your job that you're going to do. But a lot of it was contingency as well. What do you do when you have stress? How do you manage your mental preparedness? Trying to arm our soldiers against the stresses and the challenges that the first groups in Afghanistan hadn't really been ready for. But we wanted to learn those lessons, to not let the challenges and the tragedies that they'd faced be in vain. And so a lot of time and effort was spent on me and on every soldier who went, getting ready to face those mental and physical challenges. One of the things I really remember about the place, we were on the airfield and there was a running track inside the sort of secure perimeter. There was one spot where this rose bush grew, and this wild rose growing in the middle of the desert, which is really neat. And then right in front of it, a danger landmine sign from the legacy mines from the Soviet epoch in that area. So the running track kind of went around the mines. There's a little fence, but there's rose bush in the middle of the minefield. And that has always seemed like a good symbol of Afghanistan to me in a lot of ways. It is certainly harder on the families than on the soldiers. I have never been the one who was at home, but I have coworkers who have both deployed and been the spouse at home. And it is very clear to me, I'm entirely convinced, that is the one staying home who has trouble. When you are in theater, when I was in Afghanistan, I was busy. I was working 14 hours a day on a short day. And I was doing things and I was directly controlling. I knew what was true and what was wrong, what was misunderstood. I had a very clear idea what was in danger and what wasn't. No, my stresses were ones I could attack and deal with, and I had control over the circumstance. But I can imagine being back home where all you have is what's on the news and the phone rang. Is it that phone call? Oh, a black car? No, it just went by. Especially on the base where there's lots of these around. And is this the day? The soldier who died in Canada, I was there when the commanding officer and the chaplain informed the widow. I was standing in the back, and the look on her face as she came into this office that we had borrowed at her work. We talked to her boss, hey, look, there's bad things happening, we need a spot to talk to. And she comes in and she looks and she sees 3 people in dress uniforms looking grim, and she just started crying. She knew what would happen before anyone said anything. And imagining that on a base or in Afghanistan when someone's deployed and then the car pulls up and and you've got the whole walk up your lane as they're coming towards you. You know what they're going to tell you. You don't want to hear it and you have no choice. I can imagine that. I've not experienced it, but I am perfectly sure that if I weren't hurting someone else, I would much rather be the person in Afghanistan than the person waiting for the person in Afghanistan. It's not something that most Canadians think about, but there's a civilian component to this. Luckily, very few civilians were killed as part of the Canadian mission in Afghanistan. And by civilians, I mean the Canadian civilians. There were certainly many Afghan civilians who died in and around our operations, both for legitimate reasons and because of accidents. But talking about the civilian contribution, there are specialists in the military at a scale that Canada's military operates at. Can't afford. We can't have a military specialist in everything. Even the Americans can't, although they're a lot closer. Those citizens came over, took risks. A lot of them were doing what we called whole of government, bringing in this specialty and expertise in development was one that I worked with a bit. In international affairs, I worked with them on the intelligence side, understanding the civilian counterparts we were working with, the provincial and the district leaders, things like that. And then there were also civilians come over to support the soldiers. So I mentioned my sister was there at the same time. She was working as one of the support staff. So she worked in the Tim Hortons for part of her time there. Most people have heard of the Tim Hortons in Afghanistan. This little Tim's trailer set up with Burger King and a Pizza Hut from the United States and a couple of other sort of local flavor places. And so those people were over there, and did we take the best care we could? Absolutely, we protected them, but that didn't mean they were safe. It meant they were less exposed. And they were there cheerfully going about the tasks they were assigned to make sure the soldiers that could get access to those services, and it wasn't all of them, but it was the ones that were there. And our partners bringing us that perspective and understanding that most of us that none of us could provide, making sure that we were doing the best job we could for the country. So that contribution of civilians is one that is easy to overlook. You talk about families, they're the most important to me. The soldiers we talked about a great deal, but those civilians can't be overlooked. Their role is important. And there were a lot of journalists there who were working hard to capture and record and communicate that story, to explain both the courage and the challenge that the soldiers were facing and the horror and devastation that war brings, so that there's no risk of it being glorified as a great opportunity the way historical wars probably have been, certainly near their beginnings, as my reading of history tells me. The last sort of group that might be worth remembering are the animals who were at war. So I got to work with a bomb detection dog for a little bit while I was there. He was a contractor from Pakistan, but there were many who were in uniform. There's interesting stories, they were not my stories, but of animals who served in Afghanistan for the coalition, both contractors like the dog that worked with me and full soldiers from our allies. There were probably Canadian soldier animals there, but they would be with our special forces, and I really don't know anything about them. I can't tell you. They may have existed, they may not have. But certainly the Americans had veterinarians in there. They had enough animals working and fighting alongside of us, bringing their own unique talents and capabilities to our efforts there.
My name is Patrick Morane. I served with the Grand Simcoe Foresters here in Owen Sound. I was deployed to Afghanistan in 2010 in the, I think it was the beginning of May. And I served with India Company of 2 RCR, 2nd Battalion, Royal Canadian Regiment. And I served in the Provincial Reconstruction Team for Kandahar. And then Canada's role with that ended at the beginning of that summer. So we switched to the battle group and moved down into Panjwai district. With the reconstruction team, we were force protection, they call it. So that team consisted a lot of like police, government agencies, were trying to get the province back on its feet, so to speak. Like we provided infantry protection for these groups. We would go out to several times. We went to, there's a big prison in Kandahar City. I forget what it's called, but we went there several times, and we would take corrections officers there from like Canadian corrections officers, and they would do inspections of the place. They would, it was like mentoring the Afghan guards, things like that. We would do that with police as well. Like there was OPP, RCMP, even Saskatoon, I think it was there as well for police, and they would be mentoring the Afghan police. We went to different police stations for that. Just things like that. There's other agencies, even government agencies. I think it was the Department of Foreign Affairs, things like that. We took, like we were mechanized infantry, so we were in labs, and anywhere that they needed to go, we were their protection. Like we had 4 platoons for this. I think for the most part, for our guys that were there, like Canadians, we were happy to be there. I don't mean like happy, but we were glad to be there and doing our job. I don't recall ever having a day where it's like, man, I just don't want to be here or something like that, right? We didn't really have much of that. Like we didn't have particularly hard tour. Like we had certain things, but we were luckier than other ones, that's for sure, compared to what happened to them and everything. But we came close one day, but it was they took out one of our labs. That's how I know a couple guys that were injured in an IED blast, because they were coming to relieve us at our outpost outside the forward base, and there was this single spot where we couldn't have physical eyes on, and they put an IED there. So like no one was killed, thankfully, in that, but the driver was fine. I don't know how, because usually the driver that gets it. The crew commander and the gunner, like broken backs, I think a neck maybe, something like that. There's 2 guys in the back that were flown out, or they flew out because of the blast, but they were fairly well off. That's what you want anyways in those situations. But yeah, he was actually the one guy that was in the back. I knew he was a reservist actually from Sudbury, and he was in the crew compartment, like the troop compartment in the back when it happened. So it was a long day that day. But you certainly got to see how fast medical care can be, because we had the blast. We called it in because it wasn't that far away. We called it in, and we had the quick reaction force out there. Shortly after that, there was a couple Canadian helicopters and an American gunship flying around. And within about 40 minutes, I think it was, we had medevac from Kandahar there and gone, and pretty much back there in about 40 minutes. So that's pretty good for being way down south. So you got to see what it can actually do. I don't know, it's hard to say right now, because especially with no news coming out of that country anymore. I don't know, like, I know we did good there at the time. We just look at all the girls that were going to school. I don't know, like, it's hard to say. Like, I would hope that they're, like, our good deeds there are recognized. That's all I can really say. And that, well, I don't think anyone's going to forget anything from there for a while, especially with all the young guys that are still around. But that certainly helps, anyways. Yeah, I don't know what else to say about that yet, but certainly something to think about, anyways.
Okay, my name's Ross Moore. I'm from Wales in the UK. I was in B Company, 2nd Battalion, the Royal Welsh Regiment. Served in Afghanistan in 2010 and 11 on Operation Herrick 13. We were based in Helmand Province, southern Helmand Province, around the region of Lashkargah, which is the regional capital. I think that's what they call it, regional capital, regional governing centre. And we kind of operated north of Lashkargah, in and around, depending where we were needed. And then later on, we moved further towards Kandahar province and linked up with the US forces, which were based down there, and we helped them out. Did different things. I was in my regiment was an armoured infantry regiment, so we were based in working from armoured fighting vehicles, which is like a medium tank which holds 6 comfortably troops in the back as well. So we were both a light role and armoured role regiment. So depending on what the needs of the patrol were on any particular day, I was the driver of the tanks. I was the driver of the tank. I was a javelin gunner, and then just a regular rifleman as well. So depending what was needed that day. Typically, I was stuck in the tanks driving. So we were doing we had one of the engineers with us, and they're the guys that put in wells for different communities and villages. So the whole idea of the patrol was we were supposed to meet with the heads of the villages and ask them what they needed and try and provide, because they were trying to do like what they call the Hearts and Minds campaigns, where they kind of try and build a relationship with rather than be seen as an aggressive sort of force. So we would go into this area, which apparently had not been, no one from NATO forces had been there in something like 3 years or something like that, apparently. So we were going in there to try and open a dialogue with them and see if they needed stuff. And I was the front man, which was typically the case. If I was on foot, I was usually the front guy. I think because I was older and a bit more capable, from 18 to early 20-year-olds. So I was always at the front, which means you're doing the Val and minesweeping if you think you need to. So, I think there's a picture. It's got me with this pack on, with the metal detector in the side and things like that. So I was at the front, and we started working our way through this compound system, and all the way through we would meet sort of little groups of civilians, and they would say, "Oh yeah, they want to see you further up the village. Just keep going up through." So we did kind of go through, and then what actually started the suspicion, I suppose, of something going was as I was walking down a compound road, or between this path, I could smell marijuana very strongly, and I kind of relayed that through to my platoon commander, who was actually coincidentally is Canadian. He had dual citizenship, so he's from Alberta, and he just said, "Yeah, okay, well, let's carry on." And we came to a compound opening, because the way their compounds are set up, it's just all big wooden, mud walls with different openings. So you'll have multiple compounds up in one sort of village, and you could see the opening. And I kind of poked my head through to look, and then right behind the wall where we'd walked along was all this harvested marijuana, which was stacked maybe 6 feet high and probably 40 feet long. So it was a big, and when you see that, it's like there's only one reason why they're cutting all that down to sell it, to get weapons and all the rest of it, right? So that sort of sent an alarm bell off, and then we kind of started looking into it a bit, and there was a fire burning, but there was no people. So straight away there, we were like, okay, where's everyone gone? They would kind of go indoors or something if we were patrolling through, just because they were wary of us and things like that. But this was clearly something that had been happening very recently, and then they all shut off. So as we were looking around the compound, we found a few more things that were kind of suspicious, like the mortar aluminum round that we would use, that you fire it up and then that parachute comes down. we found the empty casings of them. So once they've been fired, they will open up in midair and then just drop to the ground. And they would pick those up to use for IEDs. So they would reassemble them, bury them, and so we found a bunch of the empty canisters. So we were like, okay, well, something's up to no good somewhere. And then slowly people started appearing. And the one that really stood out was one guy who was, we're pretty sure he was on drugs of some type, opium or whatever, because he was, bloodshot, and his eyes were all bloodshot. And he was saying like, oh yeah, go, the village elder or the leaders are in the next compound up, just keep going up and see them. So we kept going up, and what happened was where two compounds connected, there was one pathway between them, but it was very closed in, and typically we don't like going down those because it's an obvious ambush point. So we were going to try and cut through another compound, but as we got to it, they wouldn't let us through because they said it was the females' compound, which in their culture you can't. Men aren't allowed to go into them. So to try and keep keep things peaceful, we said, okay, well, we'll stick on this compound, the pathway, and just to the next one. So we said, okay, fine, we'll carry on. And as I started down the compound, there was, right down the end, you could see a bunch of kids were leaning around and looking, and then all of a sudden they ran off. And that's what we would call a combat indicator, which means likely they know that something's going to happen. So I radioed that back to my platoon commander. I said, a bunch of these civvies have just run off. Something's probably going to happen. And then it's pretty much as soon as I let go of the Pressel was when there was an opening in the wall there, and that's where I got shot from. So as soon as I'd said something's probably going to happen, something happened. So they started shooting. That's where I got hit. And I don't know if it went, because I would have been holding my rifle like that, so it came that way, went in there, came out the back, and I don't know if I jumped on the floor, if I fell on the floor, I don't really remember that part of it, but I was on the floor, and then it was just chaos. It was, and the one that scared me the most, so they were firing from the front of us, from the left where I got shot, and then there was one who was just putting his rifle, his AK, over the compound wall to my right, and was just spraying. And that was the one that was the most worrying, because they couldn't go in. If you know someone's pointing at you, you can move out, try and get into cover. When they're just putting it over the top and just spraying, you don't have no idea where they're going, and they were just landing all over the place. So yeah, so I managed to crawl. I was in a little scrape, probably maybe 6 inches deep, so it really wasn't giving me any cover. But next to me was a wadi, which is a dried up river or a stream bed. So I knew I had to try and get into that. So I was crawling away from the firefight, and then I had all the rest of my patrol was behind me because I was the front guy. So you have to basically filter back through while they fire you. So I was crawling away from it, and I took another round through the backpack, and you can see the entry bullet there, and then there's another one there, and this one I believe went all the way through the backpack, through here, through the top, and then came out at the top there. It's been sewn up now because I had to keep using the backpack, but there's another one there. So there was a couple of rounds that went through my backpack, and that would have been positioned like that. So they obviously shot at me while I was crawling away. My head would have been right here, and that came out right to the side. So I think they said there was about 5 shots altogether that hit me. In one area, only one of them, well, 2 of them technically hit me, one that went all the way through. Then there was another one that just grazed me, and I had a big burn blister from the friction of the round. It must have been, literally millimeters away from me. So that was a pretty lucky day. And then we had about 1.5 kilometers extraction back to our tank, because they were patrolling around the outsides. But they couldn't see a lot because of all the compound walls, so they couldn't see in the compound, so we had to extract back to them, jump back in, get back to our base, and then I was flown back to Bastion, and then I stayed there pretty much for the rest of the... But I was the only one injured, so that was good. In fact, our company, of my regiment, there was 3 companies, A, B and C company. A and C had already deployed to Afghanistan. Both of them suffered fatalities. Our company didn't get any fatalities. We had injuries. None of them were very, very serious. But luckily we didn't get any fatalities. And there's not many units of all NATO units that were there that didn't get a fatality. So we were lucky there. And then, yeah, I had two surgeries. And then I was sent home. And then I had 2 weeks off for recovery, and then back to. But going home is not like, and I've kind of laughed about this when you see YouTubes on video YouTubes of usually of like American forces when they come home. There's a big fanfare or a secret. The guy walks in the high school and sees his kids and all that sort of stuff. But it's a lot less glamorous than that in reality. I turned up in the UK at like 2 in the morning. Got driven back to my unit. I didn't have a bed to sleep in because everything's locked up, so I slept on a floor in a communal area until the next morning, and then I got to see the medical officer, and they said, yeah, go home. So yeah, it's not like you see on TV. And getting shot is definitely not like it is in the movies. There's no my arm just basically was useless because there was a lot of nerve damage and things, so it was just hanging there, couldn't do anything with it. It was spraying blood everywhere and all the rest of it. I did pass out at one point when they were treating me on the ground. They put a tourniquet on and all the rest of it, and actually that was really painful as well. It's surprising how painful a tourniquet is. But yeah, I did I remember my vision went when you see oil slick on water, that's what my vision went like. It just went all like multicolored and psychedelic almost. And then I think it only lasted a couple of seconds. It was a few slaps in the face, and then I kind of woke up and then off we went then. So that was that. A lot of people assume that being shot at is the worst thing, but it's not. Which is going to probably sound very odd. Or as an example, the most afraid I was in all of the tour of Afghanistan was not when I was being shot at, not when not when I got shot, none of that. I wasn't, scared as such. There was a bomb maker which was apparently and this was being tracked by British Special Forces. And one night we heard the helicopter flying right in our immediate, in the area that's on the map, flying around, and gunfire. What they had done is they'd located a bomb maker, they'd actually fired on him and killed him, and then our FOB was tasked to go out, recover the body, bring it back in, send it to. So this was late at night, they went out, they retrieved the body. You have to do a lot of DNA sampling when you killed someone. And the poor lad that ended up doing it, because my multiple wasn't sent out, which I think I would have preferred if it was, because I think I would have handled it better. You have to take blood samples from the wounds, and this guy's stomach had been basically, he was shot with a 50 caliber machine gun. So he, not to say to give him credit, he managed to crawl about 20 meters or so. So there was a bit of a trail. So you have to take a blood sample from a wound, and you have to take a hair follicle sample, but you can't just snip a hair off. You have to pull the root out. So you're getting quite close and intimate with the dead body. And the lad that did it was only early 20s, and I think it bothered him later on down the line. So we got the body back, and it was sent off to Bastion for whatever cataloguing they do or DNA processing. But then the next day, our commanders had the bright idea to retain the show of force, which is why you do all these patrols. It's basically to remind everyone we're active in this area, so we're always kind of. He had a great idea to go back up to where this guy's family compound was, because that's what it's family compound. They wanted us to do a patrol up there to reinforce our position. I was the lead guy again. It wasn't that far away from the FOB. It was maybe a 2 kilometer, 3 kilometer patrol out there. We got to this big compound. the platoon patrol commander said, okay, just follow the compound round, we'll go around this side, do a loop and go back up. I walked alongside the compound, turned the corner, and as I turned the corner, there was probably a group of about 200 or 300 people, and every single one of them turned and looked at me, and that was the most terrified I'd been, because if they'd have rushed us, you know, we'd be who knows where, right? And that was, and I said straight away, I turned around and I walked back, and the patrol commander was like, no, we need to go around. I said, I'm not going around there. So we turned around, came back, but that was, and the funny thing that, what it instantly reminded me, before I was even in the army, that I remember I was getting a taxi home one night from being, you know, out in the bars or whatever, and the guy that was the driver, there was something on the radio, and it was something to do with Ireland at the time, Northern Ireland and the IRA, and they were saying that, the report was saying that they were doing this Orange Man march or something, and all they did was line up on a road and just stared at the British forces. And I think the guy, a friend I was with at the time, was like, well, what's so scary about that? And the guy who was driving was an ex-soldier, and he turned around and kind of said, like, you'd be surprised how scary it is when you're met with like just a massive group of people who are completely opposed to you. And that's exactly what it reminded me of when I saw them all, the fact that they all turned around and looked. And obviously hated, because we just killed, whether he was Taliban bomb making or what, to them it was their family, right? And obviously they probably didn't look too kindly on us at that point.